So now let's look at how to configure a DHCP relay agent. Now, this is the same packet tracer activity we used in the video on configuring DHCP v4 on a Cisco router. So if you've already watched that video, you should be a little familiar with the network. This is the 192.168.1.0 network /24. This is 2.0, and this right here between the two of them is 3.0/30. And you'll see our IP address is down here. Now, if you don't have this file already, you can find the packet tracer file linked in the description. If you have Packet Tracer, you can download the file and follow along. Now, in our previous video, we configured DHCP on R1, and we set these PCs to pull an address from our DHCP server, and we verified that they were able to. Now, in this case, we're going to set up DHCP for this network, but we're going to do things a little bit differently. So here we set up a local DHCP server. On this one, I don't want to have a DHCP server on R1 and another one on R2. Instead, what I want to do is I want to have DHCP for both networks on R1, and then we're going to use a relay agent. So here's what's going to happen. Remember, DHCP is a broadcast-based protocol. So these PCs are going to send a DHCP request, and it's going to be a broadcast, and they're going to send it out, which means it's going to hit at this router because the switch is just going to flood that broadcast everywhere. So it's going to come to this router. Now, routers don't forward broadcasts. So what we have to do is configure a DHCP relay agent. And then what will happen is this device will see that it got a DHCP request on didn't want to move that, on 192.168.2.1, and it's going to forward to its helper, which is going to be this IP address. This one then will pick it up, see that it came in from 2.1, will look for a matching network, send a DHCP response back to the router, which then will forward it back onto the PC. So this is relaying DHCP messages between the DHCP server here on R1 and the clients here on its network. All right, hopefully that all makes sense. Let's start by configuring our pool. So I'm going to go to R1 and config T, and I'm going to create a remote pool. Now remember, before I do this, I have to start by excluding addresses. So it's IP, DHCP, excluded addresses, and I'm going to exclude the same range, 192.168.2.1 through 192.168.2.50. Now, this was covered in our previous video on configuring DHCP for IPv4 on a Cisco router, so go back and reference that one if you want more of a breakdown of it. Now that we've excluded our addresses, we're going to create our pool, IP DHCP pool, and I'm going to call this remote LAN. And then we're going to set the network to 192.168.2.0 and identify its subnet mask. We're going to set its default gateway, which is going to be the default. We call it a router here on Cisco. It's default gateway everywhere else. It's going to be for this network, it's going to be 192.168.2.1, which is going to be the address of this interface. So you got to remember, even though I'm doing it here, I'm going to use this as the default gateway or the default router for these devices. So I got to make sure I put in the right address. All right, a default router. We're going to set a DNS server. Now, my DNS server does not have to be on the same network. So, it doesn't have to be on the same LAN. So I'm going to do 192.168.1.10, which is the same DNS server that I used for this network. And I don't actually have that server in place. I'm just using it, as an example. And then we're going to set a domain name. And we're going to say it's remote.local, just, to be humorous. All right, so let me exit out and show our running config. So here's our excluded addresses. We have an excluded address that is excluding addresses from the pool LAN 1, and these are excluded addresses for our pool remote LAN. And you'll see we have our network associations, the default router for it, the DNS server, the domain name. Now, all of this we talked about a little bit more when we did the configuring DHCP video, so reference back to that one if you need to. Now, the next thing we're going to have to do is configure our relay agent. So we've got DHCP configured here. Now we need to configure our relay agent. Now, a relay agent is actually really easy to configure. So we need to go into en config t. I need to go into my local interface. So I'm going to do a do show IP interface brief. And my local network is going to be this one, which is going to be Gigabit Ethernet 01. Remember, this is my connection between my two routers. This is going to be the local area network that we're going to be doing DHCP relaying for. So we're going to go to interface G01. Now, here's our command. It's IP, and I'm going to do help and then tab, and you'll see the whole thing here is helper address. Now, the helper address is basically what address am I going to forward things to if I need additional help with requests. It's used for things other than DHCP relay, although that's honestly the most common use for it. So we're going to forward this to R1. So we're going to forward it to 192.168.3.1. So what we're saying is on this interface right here, if you get a DHCP request, forward it to this interface 3.1 and let this device worry about it. And this device is going to see that the request came from this 2.1 interface, and since it's a DHCP request, it's going to try to send an address back for a network that belongs to that 2.0 network. And so it's going to see, let's pull this back up again, show run, there we go. And it's going to see this pool remote LAN associated with that network, which is where that IP address is from. So it's going to use this remote LAN pool in order to serve addresses. Okay. Go ahead and finish spacing through all of that. And let's see if this works the way we want it to. So I'm going to open up PC3. And remember, Packet Tracer doesn't automatically configure these devices with DHCP, even though everything else in the world does. So we're going to go IP configuration, and we're going to say request via DHCP. So it's requesting an IP address, and it actually did not pull one. I have a problem. Let's turn that off, turn that back on. Bingo, there we go. It just took it a minute. My configuration was fine. So I got an address of 192.168.2.51. with my default gateway and my DNS server. So I am configured, and the rest of them should go perfectly without that little hiccup, because we should have already built our connections between our routers. So IP, DHCP, 2.52, and this one should be 2.53. Desktop, IP, DHCP 2.53. So we are successfully relaying DHCP requests back to this router. So in our previous video, we talked about how to show some DHCP information. So let's do this again. Let's do show IP DHCP. And remember, our options are show me bindings, conflicts, or pools. So let's look at our pools first. And I have two pools here which are showing up. So the first one is the pool LAN 1, and we have leased addresses, excluded addresses, pending events, how many are being used. And then we have the remote LAN pool where we also have 3 leased addresses, a couple of excluded addresses. So it looks like it's serving just fine. Now the way we really can tell is show IP DHCP bindings. And that's going to show us that we have now served addresses, these 3 for the 192.168.1 network, these 3 for the 192.168.2 network. Perfect. Everything is working exactly the way we want it to. We now have DHCP configured for this network, and for this network using the relay agent on this router. And that's how you configure and verify DHCP relay on a Cisco device.